Hello, everyone. Hope you can hear me okay. So I am delighted to introduce Lance Cottrell, who is a longtime friend and colleague. I'm not sure if some of you remember, but I gave a talk a couple of years ago on innovation, and I mentioned the North Bay Angels. So Lance and I have reviewed many startups at that organization where he is now the president and board chair of the North Bay Angels. As a serial entrepreneur, Lance founded Animizer in 1995. It was the world's first internet privacy company and led it to a successful exit or sale in 2009. And that's when he and his wife, Barbara, moved from Washington, D.C. back to this area. So besides his leadership in the North Bay Angels, he is a venture partner with multiple funds and a global entrepreneur in residence with the Founder Institute. Lance helps startup founders become more confident and capable CEOs through his Feel the Boot, an educational platform he launched in 2019 to guide entrepreneurs on their journey. I recommend checking out his feeltheboot.com website if you or your son or daughter or grandchildren are starting a company. His workshops and interviews offer many tips along this challenging journey. And he recently created Founder Quest to provide hands-on support to those who are raising their first investment round. So drawing from decades of experience, Lance blends practical advice with strategic foresight to help early stage founders achieve their goals. He can also talk to you about celestial matters, since his degrees are in astrophysics. So it's my pleasure to welcome Lance to the podium for his talk entitled Cryptocurrency for Dummies. And I'm one of those dummies. So Lance, come on up.
Thank you, Michelle. So my background might not make it obvious that this would be a talk that I would be giving, right? I've got a background in astrophysics, and I've been an entrepreneur. I've worked in cybersecurity. I've supported government and national intelligence activities. But back in the day, I was very active as a cryptographer, and I was there really at the birth of the whole digital currencies space. So while I was doing my PhD in astrophysics, which never did get finished because I started a company with the idea of finishing the PhD in my spare time, and spare time doesn't happen with startups. But as a side project, as I was working on my PhD, I got involved in cryptography and building security platforms and anonymity and thinking about how to protect people from being tracked online as they were going about. And that led me to get involved with some of the very earliest online digital currencies. Now, you may be thinking, what's the difference between that and the way you pay online? You've got PayPal, you've got Venmo, you use credit cards online, you can send wires to people and so forth. And so there is a lot of ways of paying digitally. Why isn't that the same as these digital currencies? And the difference is the way it interacts with the banking sector. So when you use a credit card, basically you're telling this other company, hey, go send a message to the bank that some of your money needs to be sent over to me, and the banks then clear that between them. And it's basically all a whole bunch of entries on databases inside the banks. Everyone's keeping a record of who has what and how much money is held by each different person. which means that everything you do digitally is tracked, right? The only way you could spend money conventionally in a way that's not tracked is with cash. That's why criminals tend to walk around with big suitcases full of money, because it doesn't get into all the banking records. On the flip side, if you're concerned about governments or other organizations tracking you on an ongoing basis, then all of this online commerce is problematic to you, because it is all being tracked. It's all being watched. Everyone can see every single thing that you do online, at least in the banking sector, right? And the government has access to all of these transactions. It's also vulnerable to certain kinds of attacks, right? That money only exists as an entry in a database. Well, what if someone goes in and changes that entry and says, let's remove a zero from your bank balance and add a zero to my bank balance? There's not a lot you can do about it, right? That money is now moved over, and you now need to convince someone that that was actually your money in the first place. Whereas with cash or gold, that's a thing. You can't just make a database entry and say that money doesn't exist. Now, you can steal gold and you can steal cash, so it's not a perfect world. But people were trying to reproduce that kind of experience online. How do we create something that's digital that works like cash, has the same level of anonymity, has the same level of security against someone coming in and just making changes in terms of who has what. They're also very worried about fiat currencies, dollars, pounds, euros, getting debased by the governments. And that if the government wants to print more money, they can. Suddenly all the money you have is worth less. And so there was a lot of people who were very concerned about inflation and devaluing of these currencies. And so they wanted to create something that was resistant to that as well. Now, I was involved actually in some of the earliest versions of this. There was a project called DigiCash, which allowed you to withdraw digital tokens from a bank. And then when you spent them, they couldn't be recognized. So the bank would know that they were authentic. They'd know you hadn't tried to spend them twice. They'd know that, that there was nothing strange going on, but they had no idea who had withdrawn it versus who redeposited it. Completely separated it out. So just like cash or a gold coin or something like that, it broke that connection. But it did require a bank, and it was denominated in dollars. And for various reasons, it was cumbersome to use. So that project that I was an advisor for ended up not taking off. That didn't work out. But the same people who were involved in this, and the same people who were involved in the other internet privacy projects I was in, was a group called the Cypherpunks. And this was a sort of crypto-anarchist group of people who were out there building security tools in the open source world, giving them away for free. And they started thinking about this very hard. How can you build an online currency that would have these characteristics that they were looking for? So one of the main problems with this is double spending. If I've got anonymous coins and I want to spend them, how do you know that they haven't been spent already? How do you know that this is a new thing if it's not being checked with a bank, if there's not some other entity that you're looking at? And so with the very first ones, you actually had to clear it. As soon as you got a coin, you had to deposit it and then withdraw a new coin so that it never circulated in the space. And that's how they were checking it. But again, that requires you to be working with banks, and these people didn't want to do that. So they wanted to create something where it could be completely free of any existing institutions. And in fact, no one would control it. There is no one who controls Bitcoin or Ethereum or any of the other cryptocurrencies that are out there. There's no central authority. There's no one you can point at. Interestingly, that also means there's no one who can fix things for you, right? If something goes bad, some weird outcome happens, there really is no recourse, no way you can unwind that. A couple of cryptographic breakthroughs made this possible. So you may be, when you hear cryptography, and cryptocurrency is from the word cryptography, and that really is at the heart of how this works. If you think about cryptography, if you ever think about cryptography, you're probably picturing something like the Enigma machines in World War II. The Germans had them on the sub, and if you set up the key correctly on the machine, then as you typed it in, it would come out as gibberish, and the other person types in the gibberish, and it comes out as a message again. And that's the way cryptos worked forever. Julius Caesar had ciphers that he would use called the Caesar cipher, which you could use to encrypt a message and then decrypt it on the other end. That's been there forever. The problem with this is the key. You and someone else need to have the same key. You need to agree on it, and you need to keep it secret, right? If anyone else knows what the setting is, what the key is for this message, they can then read all the rest of your messages. So you now need to have a really carefully guarded secret, and you need to have one with everyone you want to talk to, so that it guarantees that you have that secure path of communication. Well, that doesn't scale very well. I mean, I could have 5, 10, 50, 100, but I might randomly want to email one of millions of people in the world. I don't have that with them. So two things came about in the 60s, really exploded in the 70s, and they were related to public key cryptography. And so I know there's a bit of a diversion here, but stick with me. Public key cryptography has this really interesting characteristic that there are two keys, not just one. And so with a regular thing, you might think of it as a padlock. You lock the box, you give it to someone else. If they know the combination of the padlock, they can open up, access the box. Now there's actually two keyholes in there, and one of them can lock the box, but can't unlock it. And the other one can only unlock the box. And so here's the cool thing. You can give everyone the locking key, what they call the public key. You publish it in the newspaper, you put it on your website. Anyone in the world can have that key. And if they use it, it will encrypt the message in a way that only you can decrypt. No one else can do it. Right? So that's kind of really convenient. It relies on some very deep and complicated math, and it involves doing exponentials and logarithms on fantastically large numbers. But fortunately, you never need to do this. The computer does it all for you. But this characteristic of having two keys, one of which encrypts, one of which decrypts, has revolutionized security. In fact, every time you go to a website and it says HTTPS there and you see the little lock, that's what's happened. The website has published a key. Your computer automatically generates keys. You exchange the public keys in the clear because you can, and then you use that to encrypt all of the information from there. It also does something else really clever, which is it works the other way around. So if I take that secret key and I lock the box, anyone in the world who has my public key can unlock the box. And you're like, why do you want to lock something in a box that absolutely anyone can unlock? Because it proves you locked it. Only you could have locked that box if your public key unlocks it. No one else can have the key that does it. Mathematics is basically impossible with all the computing power in the world in the age of the universe to calculate one key from the other. So now we have what they call a signature. If I want to prove that I did something, I can then encrypt it with my private key. You can decrypt it with a public key. That is the core of how all cryptocurrencies work. So when I want to give you money, I then create a structured message that says, I have this coin and I'm giving you that coin, or 5 coins or 1,000th of a coin, whatever amount of money I want to transfer to you. And then I sign it with a private key. And now anyone can check that. In fact, yes, that's me. I was the owner of that, and I have a properly structured message that says now they are the owner of that. So that's how all of these things work. Every single transaction is someone signing a message saying that that coin, which they can prove cryptographically they own because they know where they got it from the previous one, this becomes a chain of transactions. Then I give to you, now you have it. Actually reminds me, there was a fascinating culture that one of their pieces of currency was giant stone wheels. And at some point, one of these wheels fell off a path and landed in the ocean, but it didn't leave the economy. So people would say, you know, that stone wheel that guy had that he gave to them for a cow, that he gave to them for 3 sheep, well, they gave it to me for this other thing, and so I can use that to pay you for something else, even though no one actually had physical access to it. It was still controlled and owned because you knew that history of transactions. So this is the key to blockchain, is it is a history of transactions, and it is anonymous in the sense that no one knows who you are. Right? All you are to the system is one of these keys. You have a private key, you create a key pair, a private and a public key, and that is your bank account, effectively. That's what they call a wallet. And it can receive keys. People can say, hey, I'm sending cash to this person. Well, what they say is, I signed a message saying that I have this coin and I am transferring it to the owner of this private key. And then when you sign a message saying that you want to send someone else the money, you sign it with that same key. You can have dozens of keys, hundreds of keys. The system all manages it for you. And there's no names attached to it. There's no real account numbers. It doesn't tie to your address or your tax information. You've just created out of thin air one of these keys. Now you have a place that can take money and you can sign it. So it is anonymous in that sense, that it's not tied to your name. But in many ways, it's pseudonymous because there is a name. There's an identifier. It just isn't a human name. But at the same time, it's the most public kind of transaction that has ever existed, because to know whether someone can send you a coin, you need to know the history of that coin since it was born to be able to track that, yes, this person actually has it. So I need to know it was created on this date, and it went from this person to this person, this person, this person, this person, down this long chain of transactions until they gave it to you. And you want to be able to verify that all of those were legit. They were all properly signed, they were all properly recorded, and they're all kept in the internet, in the cloud. And many different people will host copies of this database. But it means that every transaction that's ever taken place in any cryptocurrency is visible on the internet. You can see all of them. You just have no idea who anyone is in general. So this is why it is very popular for criminals. It's pretty anonymous. It's very hard to track. But if you can ever nail down who had it at one point, you can now start to unwind that and see who gave it to who and so forth. The other cryptography breakthrough that came about is called fingerprints. And that's where you take some big message, document, a movie, something, but you don't want to store this huge amount of information forever necessarily. And if you're trying to do signatures and say, hey, I created that video, you don't necessarily want to include the whole video every time. You just want to have a little thing. What a fingerprint does is it takes the entire contents of some block of information, audio, video, text, data, what have you, and reduces it down to one big but manageable number. And it does it in a way that is irreversible, basically. So you cannot come up with another text that will output the same answer. And that makes it unique. It's like your fingerprint. So only that one input can produce this fingerprint. So this is where we get to why this is called blockchain. Okay, we're now, 15 minutes in, punchline here. Okay, here's why is it called blockchain? It's because these things work as a chain of blocks. Creative naming. So what's going on is you have this set of transactions, and at some point you want to lock it down and say, okay, this bunch of transactions, we're going to record that, we're going to put it up on the internet, everyone's going to remember what they are so we can look at them later, and we're going to start on a new block. But I want to make sure that you can't go back and change that old block. So what you do is the next block starts with that fingerprint, what they call a hash of the previous block. And so the next block contains within it the hash of the previous block. And then the next block that gets created contains the hash of that block. And the next block contains the hash of that block, which means that if you change one bit in an earlier block, it would invalidate all of the following blocks. You can immediately tell if anyone's tried to modify anything because it won't work, because just changing one bit in a document changes roughly half the bits in a fingerprint. So it becomes a very easy way of being able to look back and see that this chain is valid. So when you make a transaction, you say, I want to send someone this coin, you post it up on the internet, you send it out to a bunch of people who are called validators. And they're going to accumulate a bunch of transactions together until they get a fixed size. And then they're going to do this really complex calculation on it. It's designed to be extremely labor intensive to do this thing. It's a little puzzle, basically, that the algorithm says you have to do to create a block. And the first person who succeeds in doing that puzzle publishes it with the answer to the puzzle as part of the block, including the hash from the previous block. And the algorithm for doing this automatically gives them a little bit of currency, a fraction of a block of a coin, some Bitcoin, some Ethereum, whichever system. So that's the reason that they want to do this, right? That's what encourages someone to do this exercise. It's the amount of work that goes into it that makes it secure. So you're pumping one of these blocks out every few minutes because there's a lot of transactions going on. So every couple of minutes, a new block comes out, new block comes out, new block comes out. Well, after, say, an hour, the amount of work it would take to mess with this transaction that happened an hour ago, 20 blocks back, because any change there would be visible, you'd actually have to then resolve all of those hugely complex puzzles to try to get it out there. And it becomes rapidly, absolutely infeasible, borderline impossible to try to change anything that's happened. So this chain of blocks basically locks it in amber. There's no way you can change anything historically, and you'd immediately be caught doing it because everyone else is busy trying to do this same thing so they can earn their little bit of Bitcoin. This is, if you've ever heard of Bitcoin mining, this is what Bitcoin mining is. It's that process of validating each block, and if you win the race, you get that little piece of Bitcoin for doing that. That is how new Bitcoins are created. It's the only way to create new Bitcoins is to succeed in mining a new block. And so the people who are running these huge farms of servers are doing it because they want those Bitcoins. And they've worked out that wherever they are, the cost of electricity is cheap enough that you can afford to run this big bunch of servers to crank out new Bitcoins. And at the same time, they're providing a service. They're validating each of those blocks and making sure that that chain exists. And because there's a lot of people doing it, they're effectively all acting as cross-checks on each other. Right? Everyone's racing to be the first one to do it. If anyone wanted to try to modify a block 20 blocks back, well, every other validator is just going to ignore that because they know it was an error. They'll keep putting out new blocks. And those transactions on the one orphan chain, everyone's immediately going to be able to see were bogus. That'll die out. No one will ever recognize those. So it's an interestingly self-enforcing system that there is no sort of central authority approving anything. But because of the collective nature of all of these people mining for coins, putting out these blocks, it automatically provides the security on the entire chain. This is what's called a proof of work system. You have proven that you've done all of this work to solve this puzzle. There are now a few other ways of building blockchains. There's something called proof of stake, where you sort of bet a whole bunch of your coins to do this. And then if it's ever shown that you've done something hinky, basically you lose those. And so you are incented to be honest. And they're doing this because they're trying to waste less electricity. Because at some level, this Bitcoin mining is just spinning wheels to spin wheels, right? The reason it is hard and computationally expensive and requires all this electricity is that's where the security comes from. It has to be hard, but it doesn't actually do anything useful other than being hard. So they are trying to come up with other more efficient things. But as more and more people use Bitcoin, that is why you hear people talk about the environmental and energy impacts of Bitcoin. Is it is a huge amount of computation going on to generate these things. In fact, it was one of the biggest wasters of electricity in all computation until AI was invented, but that's a separate talk. I think I've talked through several pages here already. So these blockchains can be used for a lot of things other than just cryptocurrencies. Right? You now have this public ledger of immutable information. You can put other things on there. So for example, you might create a blockchain to record shipments. And so people will set up their own little blockchain systems that aren't part of Bitcoin, that are separate. But if you've got a situation where there's a group of somewhat mutually distrustful people who want to be able to collaborate on tracking something, and so something like shipping or buying electricity, where you've got multiple people generating electricity, multiple people consuming it, you want to have some public way of keeping track of all of that. None of these people are necessarily coordinating. They don't trust each other. Having some public record of all of this that can't be messed with by any third parties and is transparent to everyone involved can be a really good way of solving that. So you're seeing other applications of this underlying blockchain technology to achieve other things. Some of you may have heard of NFTs, or non-fungible tokens, related to blockchains, and they are. So this is another thing where instead of doing a currency or a coin on the blockchain, what you're doing is you're recording ownership of some asset. So maybe you have an image One of the most famous was the Bored Ape Yacht Club. So someone created this enormous number of computer-generated pictures of bored-looking apes dressed up like for going yachting, a couple hundred of them, all different, and then sold them off. And so you could buy it. And on the blockchain now, it says you are the owner of that ape. No one else in the world can have that ape, and you can sell it to someone else. Now, anyone can have the image, right? The image itself is not protected in any way. It is effectively trading a certificate of authenticity, right? I have the thing that says that I own the real one of these. Anyone can look at it, but I have that thing. It's pride of ownership. And you might think of it almost like baseball cards, right? There's a lot of baseball cards out there, but I have this one. Is it inherently valuable? We can argue about that, but they've spread out into all kinds of different things. You can get these kinds of tokens, NFTs for artwork. Sometimes it's done for fundraising. You know, a museum will create non-fungible tokens, images of some of their artworks, and you can pay to have effectively a certificate saying, yes, I own this digital version of this, which is also sort of saying that I supported the museum, or at least I bought it from someone who supported the museum, right? It then trades hands. They've taken this now another step and created things called smart contracts. So they can actually, in addition to just having something that says you have a coin, or you have a bored ape, or you have a copy of the digital Mona Lisa, you can actually have some logic built into it as well. So that you can say, when this happens, if this other transaction happens, then automatically the token will duplicate, evaporate, you know, it can be given to someone else, it can be subdivided or not. There's all sorts of little things you can now do that tie into either outside resources or internal transactions and allow you to build some fairly sophisticated things. So people are talking about trying to do things like even having real estate on the blockchain, so that instead of having a physical deed somewhere recorded in you know, some dusty cellar in the city, what if that was just out there on the cloud? Anyone could verify the deed instantly, right? You wouldn't have to do a check and have someone go out and verify that, you know, this is properly owned. It's instantly visible and transferable and subdividable and movable into trust funds and anything else you wanted to do with it. So there's a lot of kinds of capabilities that these blockchains are enabling and being explored. So the big ones you hear about are the public ones. So Bitcoin was the first and is the best known. There's a handful of others. Ethereum, it's best known for doing the smart contracts and things like that, but it also is an active currency. And then you get these tokens that live on them that are like currencies but aren't. So there was the Dogecoin for a while, which had a Shiba Inu, I think, icon as its image. It sort of started as a joke, but then people started to use it. Because what is money at the end of the day but a shared hallucination that this thing is worth something, right? It's a piece of paper. It isn't actually worth anything. So if a bunch of people agree that this digital token of a dog is worth something, well, then it is, right? If you can buy stuff with it, it's real, it's money, it's valuable. And so that's the interesting thing about Bitcoin, is that there is no outside valuer for it. It's just floating out there, and it's worth something because people have agreed it's worth something. Right? Why is gold worth what it's worth, and why is it worth something different today than yesterday? Because people are willing to pay more or less than they did yesterday for whatever reason that may be. So there's a lot of people who seem to think that cryptocurrencies are going to be worth more tomorrow than they are today, so they buy them and hold them. So who does use cryptocurrency? From my perspective, there are three categories of people who engage in buying and using cryptocurrency. The first is the speculators, by far the largest group, I believe. People who are buying it because they think it's going to go up and they want to hold it and eventually maybe sell it, but they tend to want to hold it for a long time because they think it's going to keep going up. And they're right so far. Historically, it's gone up a lot. Right? You know, I think it's much near $100,000 a coin or something now. I've always been a little dubious of it because there's no fundamentals here, right? It's not tied to anything real. It is sort of just floating up there in the air, and it hovers because I don't know what it's like, Tinkerbell or something. We all believe it'll fly, so it flies, right? But at the same time, when I first became aware of Bitcoin, it was worth less than $1 per coin. And if I had just spent 20 bucks on it, I'd be feeling really good right now. But I didn't because I'm kind of a fundamentals investor kind of person, and I didn't buy it. It just didn't make sense to me. But most of the Bitcoins that are held that way. The next category is criminals. A lot of crime, right? If you see someone doing a ransomware, right? They infect a company's computer network with something that encrypts all of their data or deletes everything, and they say you can get it back if you give us money. It's always Bitcoin that they want, right? If they're scamming you, and someone scams you individually, they'll probably ask you to get like prepaid cards from the grocery store, but that's because this is chump change. If I want to get $10 million from a large corporation, I don't want a truckload of prepaid cards. I want Bitcoin. And so you're going to send it to me. And you say, no, wait a minute. Didn't you just say that we can track every coin that's out there, right? I mean, how can that be safe? And you can, right? So that first transaction is absolutely tracked. Everyone knows that this company that was attacked sent money. They're going to tell the FBI. They're going to tell everyone else who's involved. The person who receives it can do a couple of things. One is they're going to sit on it for a while. They're just like not do anything. The other thing they'll do is start to send it to other accounts, right? These are all pseudonymous. So that one big chunk of Bitcoin that came in suddenly exploded into 1,000 small pieces in 1,000 other accounts. Because remember, it takes nothing to set up a new account. You can set up accounts all day long as fast as you want. There now have come into place because there's a need, and anytime there's a need in society, someone will come along with a tool to fill it, things called Bitcoin tumblers. And so with this, you send your Bitcoins into it along with a whole bunch of other people sending Bitcoins to this one account. They then, and you tell them, by the way, send these out to this other 20 accounts. And they then randomize the coins, randomize the amounts, and send all the money back to everyone minus a service fee. And now you have no idea which of the accounts that sent money in were the accounts that got money out, where they're related at all, right? Because it's randomized everything. You do this a couple of times, it becomes really impossible to track anything unless the Bitcoin tumbler is keeping records, which is of course why this becomes this wonderfully complex sort of trust game, because obviously some of these tumblers are run by law enforcement, because why wouldn't they, right? They can actually see absolutely everything. The third group that needs Bitcoin is actually, I think, the most interesting, and it's people living in hyperinflating economies. Right? If you're living in a country where the inflation rate is 1,000, 10,000% per year, your money is getting cheaper by the minute. You need, it's like during Weimar Germany, they were buying loaves of bread with wheelbarrows of cash, and it was so debased that fundamentally they just waited. They didn't even look at the currency numbers on them anymore. If you live somewhere like that, Bitcoin makes a lot of sense, right? Suddenly you've got something that even though it's pretty volatile, it goes up and down every day, it's bouncing around, you now have a stable basis comparative to the kind of currency you have day to day. And so it becomes a very appealing place to put your money. Also, because it's not governmentally controlled, you can move it across the border easily, right? Because a lot of these governments tend to be wanting to have tight controls over cross-border traffics of their currencies. They don't want people pulling their money out and investing it somewhere else. Well, if you can get your money into Bitcoin, you can then deposit it in a bank account in America or anywhere else and move things very, very quickly. So that's actually a very interesting space where the underlying currencies are not useful. So I talked about how Bitcoins are priced. And basically that happens at traders who are trading fiat money, dollars, euros, what have you, for Bitcoin. And that's a floating active market, just like the stock market. There's buyers and sellers all the time. That's what sets the price on a day-to-day basis. If there's some piece of news, people are worried about the economy, Bitcoin tends to spike because they worry about the dollar or whatever local currency it is. If people are, worried about some security breach in Bitcoin, suddenly the value plummets down. Yeah, what is it? Yeah, Bitcoin in the last 5 years, it went from $11,000 a coin to $113,000 a coin. good investment, right? 9x in 5 years. If you don't like that, people have created something called stable coins, which are fixed to a real asset. So if you want to be able to do cryptocurrency things, right? You want to be able to move these things around and move them across borders and handle these coins in various ways, but you don't want to deal with the fact that it is free floating and, if I sell you something today, I set a price, it's going to cost you 1,000th of a Bitcoin. Well, the number of dollars that is could change radically day to day, and that's kind of hard for me as a business, unless I'm working in an entirely Bitcoin world. I might want it to be tied to the dollar. So people have come up with what they call stable coins, which are pinned to a real currency. So at all times, that will be a dollar. And so now you can trade them, do all the other Bitcoin-y things, but it is always in dollars. Almost always in dollars, right? It's a little like a money market fund where the fund is pinned to $1, right? But every once in a while, something happens called they break the buck and they don't have enough currency behind it. And suddenly the price is no longer a dollar. The underlying asset isn't there. So there's a couple ways they try to do this. You have it either 100% backed with actual currency so they can support it, or it's fractionally backed, which is more common, or it's backed with some other kind of Bitcoin, and you hope that there's enough of it for them to be able to maintain it. But it is a less volatile way of managing your Bitcoin. So how do you get this? If this has in any way convinced you that you want to dabble in Bitcoin, and as you can tell, I'm not necessarily an advocate, but I am also feeling non-buyer's remorse for not having invested earlier. One of the easiest ways is what they call a custodial wallet. You go into one of these brokerage sites where you can buy the Bitcoins and they will hold them in an account for you. So it actually is a lot like a bank account. You're not having to manage them themselves. There's just a ledger entry in their system that says, here's how much Bitcoin you have. And so Coinbase is probably one of the biggest ones. You set up an account with them, you register, you tie it to your bank account, or not usually credit cards because they don't want you to buy it on credit and then default. Makes it really easy to buy and sell because it's all on this platform. And so they manage it all for you. The downside is, of course, every once in a while we'll see a big hack and someone will break into one of these sites and steal, $100 million worth of Bitcoin or something like that. And so that's a problem. I mean, the scale of some of the crimes that have happened to Bitcoin are mind-blowing. The dollar amounts are truly astounding, especially as Bitcoin has become really valuable. Another approach is you can hold it yourself. This is basically the mattress-based portfolio. It's equivalent to having a big safe of money in your house. So you set up your own keys, you use a little piece of software to do it, but it sets up the crypto keys for you. They're on your computer, and when someone sends you the money, you do the transaction and those keys live on your computer. Anyone who has access to those keys has access to your money because the key and the money are effectively the same thing, right? Because there's no money that is actually stored on your computer. Those coins are actually just entries in that blockchain that's out there in the cloud. And your key is the thing that allows you to access it and control it. So upside of that, you don't need to worry about these big breaches. No one's going to go in and hack Coinbase and take all your money. As long as the structure of Bitcoin is intact, and it's stood up to a lot for a long time now. It was originally created in 2008. You're good to go. Downside is if you are hacked, of course, they will get it. So you now have transferred the security risk from this big institution to your personal computer. There's also things called cold storage. So you can take those keys and put them on a thumb drive or on a special encrypted physical device, which is not on your computer. And that really is really secure. That's almost impossible to hack. If you've got this stored in an offline place, no one's going to get in it. One of the early people who worked on Bitcoin had all of his Bitcoins on a hard drive, which he kept separate. And it ended up in the trash, and he lost a few $1 billion of Bitcoin. And he actually spent years digging through this landfill trying to find it and has eventually given up, but oops. Backups are really good. So if you want to go into this, having more than one copy in more than one place is essential so that if, for example, you live somewhere where houses burn down every once in a while, that all of your Bitcoins don't burn down because they were in the house, right? You'd want to have them stored in the cloud or in a safety deposit box in a nearby town or somewhere else to manage that. So how do you get Bitcoin? Easiest way is going to those central trading houses, so Coinbase and the like. Binance is another big one. So you can go in, tie it to your account, buy the Bitcoins, and because they're so easy to move, right, you buy it on there, and if you wanted to hold them yourselves, you can then just immediately transfer them to your computer, you can immediately spend them somewhere else, right? They're incredibly fluid as soon as you get some coinage. And we talk about coins, but in fact, that's just sort of the unit of measure. So like I said, they're $100,000. I think it's like the smallest unit is like 100 millionth of a Bitcoin or something like that. They define some insanely small unit. And so you can break it down into that. And so you're actually just trading a fraction of a coin. So if I had, let's say, a coin and I wanted to send you a millionth of a coin, I actually do two transactions. I send you a millionth. I say this coin is being spent, and I send you a millionth of a coin, and I send myself 999,999ths of a coin, and then I still own that. So you can instantly make change and break things up as much as you want. You can also just buy Bitcoin from someone individually. Like if you know someone who has Bitcoin, you can just write them a check or hand them some gold or dollars or what have you, and they can transfer them to you. As long as you know them and trust them, that can be an easy way to do it. It's a little more manual. Don't recommend that. If you just wanted to do this on an investment basis, though, you don't actually need to touch Bitcoins at all because most of the major brokerages out there now have Bitcoin portfolios. So you can go to Fidelity or any of these other big brokerage houses and open a Bitcoin account. And so they're making the investments, they're doing this stuff on the back end, but to you, it just looks like anything else. You're investing in a REIT, you're investing in the S&P 500, you're investing in some index fund. In fact, there are now tradable index funds that are invested in Bitcoin. So you can go to the stock market and just buy an exchange traded fund that is itself invested in Bitcoin, and now you're participating in that market. And that is probably the easiest way to do it if you want to get involved in this, right? Least sort of complexity. You can basically ignore almost the entire talk that I've just given in that case and just buy one of these investments if that's something you want to do. And of course, because these brokerage accounts typically allow you to make very small investments, you could put $100 into the cryptocurrency space. Also, potentially, you're investing in multiple currencies. It doesn't all need to be Bitcoin. You could be getting some Bitcoin, some Ethereum, some Dogecoin, some whatever other tokens that fund is investing in. Gives you some more diversity on the platform. But it's still vulnerable, right? I mean, someone is owning this, so potentially someone could go in and hack Fidelity's accounts, and there really isn't much recourse. So if Fidelity's Bitcoin holdings for some reason get liquidated, then that entire fund is probably going to zero. We have not seen any of those lately. They're probably doing a good job with security. They're probably using offline storage, cold storage solutions to make sure that it isn't easy for someone to come in and break these systems. But the lack of fundamentals always concerns me, right? It's been going up, it goes up fast. The more instability there is in the world, the more it tends to increase. But it doesn't even have what dollars have, which are you have to pay your taxes in them. Right? That is one of the reasons why dollars are reliable is people have to use them for certain things. And so therefore, you know that when you need to pay that, that's going to be the currency that you need to use. And you might as well use it for other things, but it has a little bit more base. It's not like it was once upon a time when it was in fact backed with gold or silver or some other asset underlying it, right? They're all just fiat currencies these days, but there are laws that require you to use them. It is legal tender, right? It says it right on the bill, which means people have to let you pay your debts in dollars. There's nothing that says you have to take Bitcoin to pay off a debt, right? But you do have to take dollars. So there's always the chance that this consensual hallucination comes to an end and everyone decides that, what were we thinking? Bitcoins. I mean, I don't want that. Bam, instantly you could have 99% of the value evaporate. It could happen in a day. And it probably, if we ever do have one, probably will happen in a day, right? As the air starts to come out of things, these death spirals happen in a big hurry. Which is why I'm still on the outside, green with envy of all the people who've been holding forever and ever. But anyway, I imagine there are some questions, so I think why don't we throw this open? Do we need to have I guess we need to have a microphone running around.
We are. We'll have 2 microphones coming, and we'll. Great. And so I'm going to take the first question from this side of the room. Anybody have one? I thought you would. Let me come over and get this to you. Right here. Okay, everything I got here. There you go. Could you stand?
Thank you for a great talk. Maybe it was in there somewhere and I just missed it, but what actually controls the number of Bitcoins that there is out there? You know, in gold, you know, there's a limited amount of gold somewhere, but it becomes more and more difficult to mine. And I thought there was some sort of equivalent to that in Bitcoin.
Absolutely, yeah. So I talked about the mining process, right? And the fact that each time you process one of these blocks, the person who succeeded in doing that puzzle gets paid. That is how Bitcoin are created. So the very first block that was created by a guy who went by Satoshi Nakamoto, almost certainly an alias. Ironically, I almost certainly have met the person who created Bitcoin or people who created Bitcoin because it was in this small community of crypto anarchists, the cypherpunks back in the day where I was very active. I happen to have no idea which one of them it was, but so that very first transaction created the first coin. And so for the first hundreds of blocks created, I think the person who solved the block got like a coin every single time, a whole Bitcoin. And then the algorithm is set up so that when you passed a threshold number of blocks, then the amount of coins minted each time goes down. So now every time you create a new block, you're getting half a coin and then a smaller and smaller fraction. So we've now been through a number of these steps as Bitcoin's grown. So it is inherently an inflating currency, but the rate of inflation is tied to the activity on the platform, but is inherently declining over time. And it's just built into the definition of how the algorithm works. And the way the blocks function. So it is a little bit like gold that way, that it's inherently a self-limiting system. Always growing, but you can't suddenly just make up a whole bunch of new ones.
I have a question. So our president has set up his own cryptocurrency in his name, and I understand it has made him and his family vastly wealthier. Is this a good thing? Is this a safe thing? What is your opinion?
Well, it's a great thing for him, without question. So it is, and the Trump coin is one of these tokens that I talked about. It's like a non-fungible token, like those Bored Apes or the Doge coin. So it is not actually a proper cryptocurrency. It's a token that lives on some other chain. But yeah, so what he did was it's using these smart contracts. He basically created a fixed number of tokens and owned all of them to start with, and then sold off some fraction of them. And people were happy to buy them because, I don't know, they thought they'd go up. They want to support Trump. They think it's a cool idea and want to keep it. It's not all clear to me why people would want to buy these because they're super volatile, but they're buying it usually for other cryptocurrencies. So you'd give the Trump family a number of Bitcoins, and then they, as part of that transaction, automatically transfer some number of Trump coins to you. I mean, it's basically a pyramid scheme kind of thing, right? The person who sets up the thing gets the lion's share of the coins, and people are actually launching new coins all the time. This happens continuously. Most of them don't go anywhere because you look at this and say, why would anyone, if I buy this coin from you, why in the world would anyone buy it from me, right? What's the resale value on this? And in fact, there isn't any, so most of those go down. But like anything else, it is one of those consensual hallucinations. If you've got a population of people who believe that because the Trump name is on this, this will be valuable, then that's valuable. I haven't actually tracked it. I have no idea whether it's gone up or down or what's happened, but certainly there's the potential that it would go up and be worth more later. But it seems like the most egregious of speculation kinds of things to me, or it is a display, right? It's having a pride sticker on your car or something like that. Being seen to and talking about having bought Trump coins probably carries currency in certain circles.
Two quick comments and then a question. Um,
There we go. Thank
Yeah.
you.
On that last one, it's also a way that a person who wants to bribe Trump can give him money.
Absolutely.
Okay. Secondly, the idea that this is money is sort of weird because it's basically the same as when you go back to the tulip craze. Could I use the tulip as money? And I think the answer is probably not. But the question I have is the following.
But many people did for quite a while.
Until it collapsed.
Yeah.
Last week, there was an announcement that PayPal's crypto partner had accidentally printed $300 trillion worth of tokens, but had figured it out in time to get rid of them. Can you explain that sentence to me?
Yeah, so this is the difference between the underlying blockchain currencies, which are in some level fundamental. So Bitcoin is built into the structure of the blockchain of the Bitcoin chain. Ethereum is fundamentally built into the structure of the Ethereum chain. Those are the two biggest and best known ones. All of these other things like the Dogecoin, the Trump coin, whatever the PayPal one calls it, are smart contracts living on top of it. And so you have then written some code that says you're going to create these, but because you wrote the code, you created it, it doesn't follow those same rules of Bitcoin, where there's a limited number of coins and the way that they can be mined is very strictly defined in the algorithm. You're defining it yourself. And so, yeah, it could be as simple as someone fat-fingered an extra zero onto something that, as long as you did it from the key, that the smart contract, this little piece of code, this little program that lives on the blockchain recognizes as having the authority to mint new coins, then it can. And this is one of the things that I get very nervous about with some of these secondary tokens is they are subject to that, or people have found bugs in them, right? Someone is using some smart contract, which is just code, it's a little program, and someone will realize that there's a way of exploiting it. There's a trick that you can play to get, to transfer coins or create new coins or destroy coins or whatever it is you want to do. And it's very hard to fix that. Usually one of the things you can do if you have that master key is you can update the software. So you can patch your own tokens at some level. But yeah, so because it is this meta thing over which they made the rules, they have the ability to just manufacture an infinite number if they want accidentally.
I have multiple question. Is it taxable? And the other one is
Legally or
you
practically?
just, yes, both. And the other thing is you can't go to the grocery store with a Bitcoin that I know of, not at least the Oakmont Village market. And who wants to be the Bitcoin owner of a photograph? Who cares if everybody else can see it?
So tax, the answer is yes, they are taxable. The IRS has caught up and put out rules about this. So legally, if you have Bitcoin and you're making money on it, you owe taxes on it. But no one's reporting them, right? So no one is filing a, 1099 crypto form saying that you earned all of this money somehow. So it is very much a self-reported kind of thing. If you think you're going to get audited, or if you plan to be spending a lot of Bitcoins at some point and you worry that an auditor will look at this and go, well, where did that money come from? And why don't we have taxes on that in the past? And maybe we're going to get you in a lot of trouble. If that's not something you're worried about, then Yeah, you absolutely can just blow off the taxes. And because it's so international, it is kind of tricky to say, what even is the domicile of this and where does your account live? And, you can set up thousands of accounts, none of which are tied to you. So it is in practice an honor system with a big stick, potentially. Oh, and the third one. Why is Mickey Mantle's baseball card worth $1 million? I think that's the analogy that I come back to with these things is people think it's cool. They think it is exclusive, right? You can't be the owner of that picture, even though anyone can look at a picture. But I can get a PDF of Superman 1 and look through it and see all the pictures and enjoy it. But yet people are willing to pay insane amounts of money to buy a physical copy of Superman 1, which they then never look at, right? If they're going to look at Superman 1, they'll actually go look at the PDF. But same with the Mickey Mantle card, right? It's sitting in some vault somewhere because it's worth too much to even look at and expose to light. Yeah, it's again one of these hallucination things where it's worth it because people have agreed it's worth it. Someone thought it was cool and bought it, and a couple of them have become extremely valuable. And this is one of those crashes, though. Like the Bored Apes, people paid well over $100,000 for a single Bored Ape image. And then suddenly the zeitgeist changed and they're almost worthless now. And there were some people who were very upset who bought in at the peak and lost it all, like tulips, right? I mean, if you bought one of those, if you sold your house for a tulip that was worth nothing 6 weeks later, you'd be pretty pissed off. Tough. Okay, how do you spend it? So there are online sites that take crypto now. So there are online stores that you can buy and sell things from, but realistically, there's not a lot of that done. Mostly it's a store of value thing, and then you're going to transfer it to something else. In some countries, like these hyperinflating economies, I would imagine that a lot of those stores, the store owner has a crypto app on their phone, and you actually could go in and buy apples for crypto in those places. The software exists for it, just we don't live in a place where it's worth sort of the extra hassle and complexity to do it. But in practice, it's pretty easy.
Yeah, I'm trying to understand the architecture of Bitcoin mining a little bit. Who knows who's coming first? There's this kind of, people are all writing down this code and trying to figure out what's happening. Who's watching this? How do you know? Is it in the logarithm itself that?
Yeah, no, that's it's a profound question. It's a lot of the thinking and design went into exactly this problem. So there is no one overseeing. It is a collective activity. So you've got a whole bunch of these miners. So when you do a transaction, you automatically send the transaction that you want to do to a whole bunch of miners all at once. Right. So I want to give you 1/1,000,000th of a Bitcoin. So I post that transaction. I send it out to 100 different miners out there, and they all.
But are the miners listed as such?
Yeah, there are public databases.
They've signed on to some platform.
Yeah, they've listed themselves as being miners, and so the software you use sort of polls to get a list of updated active miners that are out there, and so there's sort of.
What kind of credentials do you need to be a miner?
None. You can run mining software on your computer at home in your spare time. That's what it was originally. Nowadays, the people who are running it have 10,000 computers and data centers around there. But you could absolutely just run a miner on your laptop at home. It might be a long time before you ever be the person who solved the puzzle first, but it's actually statistical. It's not like one of these things where you have to do a lot of work to do it. The actual test is easy. The problem is you need to try randomly. And so the way the puzzle works is you basically need to find a number such that the fingerprint of the whole block comes out to this special form. If I recall, I think the one number needs to end in like 8 nines or something like that. in a row. And if you can find a number that you can stick into that block, so that when you calculate that hash, that fingerprint, you get a number that ends in 8 nines, boom, you publish that and claim it and start work on the next block. And everyone else goes, well, that's already been published, and moves on to the next block as well. So the algorithm, as part of the process of registering the block and signing that you have solved this, because you use a cryptographic key to sign that you calculated this block. As I recall, part of calculating the block is adding these random numbers to try to get the right fingerprint. Another piece of the block is your key, right? So that no one else can claim to have solved it, because their solution would be different because they put their key into the block, and every time you change anything in the block, it completely changes the result. So it is provably yours, and the algorithm basically says, if you signed the block, then you own this amount of cryptocurrency, which you can then make a transaction and send it to yourself in some other account or whatever you want. So you instantly get that additional value. But yeah, there is no registration, there's no central authority, there's no minimum criteria. Anyone can set up shop as a Bitcoin miner. But the system's also designed so that that isn't risky, right? It doesn't matter if the person who's running this is the Pope or the head of the mob. They really can't do anything bad with that other than just try to be first. And it's very, very, very hard to do any sort of collaboration things because the whole system is designed in very sophisticated ways to make it almost impossible to do any kind of collaborations. And I don't think there are any examples of anyone ever launching that kind of attack successfully on the blockchains.
I can't imagine myself navigating this mystical world. Did you say that they're legitimate brokerages, maybe an oxymoron there, that you could go walk into and say, I want to invest in some crypto coin. Can you manage this for me? Here's $100,000. Can you divide this up in?
Yeah, all of the major ones do. So if you have a Fidelity account, they've got crypto funds, right? And so same interface, you just go into if you have an online brokerage, go in there and, type in crypto or Bitcoin or something like that. And I'll bet you see a whole bunch of different kinds of offerings that they have. Right there in your standard account, you don't need to do anything special to get in on it. You just say, yeah, transfer, I want to buy some of that. Same way you'd buy, a S&P 500 index fund. Well, so if you've got an advisor, they may refuse, and I would never recommend necessarily investing more than you can afford to lose. Like, I am an active startup investor. I invest in early stage companies. And you want to talk volatility, the expectation is that 90% of my investments will go to zero. So you don't take your entire nest egg and throw it into an asset like that. Bitcoin, if you've got $100,000 in the market, taking a couple $1,000s and throwing it in Bitcoin might be fun and lets you sort of see what's going on. But yeah, small slice.
Who or how are the puzzles created that have to be solved?
So they are built into the definition of the way the algorithm works. And so, Echo's saying, different chains do it differently. If I recall correctly, and it's been a while since I actually looked at the algorithm for Bitcoin, it uses those fingerprints that I talked about, where, you take the entire block of transactions and you run it through what's called a hash algorithm. You take that fingerprint, you get out this big long number at the end. And fingerprints are designed so that any change completely changes the fingerprint, right? So if I just change one letter in the dictionary that I'm hashing, utterly different. On average, half of the bits, half of the numbers in that output should be changing completely, right? Absolutely random. So I have this block, and I want to find a fingerprint that ends in a bunch of nines. It's just the way the algorithm is defined. That is the puzzle. Find a fingerprint for this block that ends with a whole bunch of nines. And so in addition to the data in the block, all those transactions that we're recording, there's a spot for you to put in a random number and your own key. And so you put in your key, you put in a random number, and you calculate a fingerprint. And it ends with 7235. Like, well, that's not it. Okay, let's change that random number. Calculate the fingerprint again. 1167. Nope. Change that random number again. Calculate the fingerprint again. 999998. Oh, crap. Almost. Right? And you just keep doing this over and over and over and over again. And as soon as you get a random number in there that when you calculate the fingerprint over the entire block gives you all of those nines at the end of the number, bingo. You know, put your hand, you say, bingo, publish it to all of the other, or a bunch of other people who are Bitcoin miners. They all recognize that you're there first and start working on the next block, because if they don't, and you know, eventually they calculate their own, now the blockchain's probably already moved on. There's a couple of new blocks have already been created. No one's going to recognize their old block. And so it is sort of self-healing in that way. And there can be race conditions, right? If two people get a bingo within, say, a second of each other, and that can easily happen, they're all going to then publish that result to all of the other miners. And each miner is going to take the first result that they saw and start calculating the new result. And so you might end up for a very short time with a couple of different versions of the chain, but very quickly, one of these will, you know, kind of like a virus going through a population, it will start to grow and take over, and the other one dies off, and it happens almost instantly. But that's the puzzle. It's not a cool puzzle or anything. It's just, you know, find a number that gives you a bunch of nines.
Yes, I have two questions. You're probably aware 2 weeks ago there was a crypto crash, and a lot of people lost millions, if not billions of dollars. How does that happen, and how do they lose it? And the other question is, can you comment what XRP is?
So in terms of the crashes, it would be like if you owned a lot of silver and suddenly the price of silver went down by 50%. I mean, I remember there was a time when silver really just absolutely collapsed. And so you have lost money because the underlying asset is worth less in dollars. I mean, everyone still has the same number of coins. The Bitcoin crash didn't erase any coins for anyone. It's just that at that time, the coin's worth less than it was before. But, you know, since that crash, it's probably come back up. It's just super volatile, right? I mean, you know, you're used to, say, exchange rates between the euro and the dollar changing by tiny fractions at a time. Maybe there's some big news, it changes by 1%. But yeah, you'll see occasionally Bitcoin will swing by 10, 20% a day or a couple of days. And it's just because of that. It's like the stock market. If everyone decides that it's not worth it, it's not worth it, right? With a stock, if some news comes out that, you know, this medical company was working on a cancer treatment and the FDA announces that actually it looks like that cancer treatment doesn't work, or it kills half of the people who take the medicine or what have you, suddenly the stock price is instantly going to drop by some huge amount. And you would say everyone who owned that stock has lost money because they now can't turn it back into dollars. And the other part, I'm not familiar with that acronym. Yeah. Like, I don't follow all of and there's so many different tokens and chains and all of these different things that I don't try to keep track of all of them.
Thank you very much. My question is about the SWIFT. Oh, the SWIFT system that the banks use to
Yeah.
communicate safely around the world. Could this blockchain thing like replace the SWIFT system safely for banks to communicate with each other?
Absolutely. And I think a lot of people have looked at this, and it is exactly one of those examples where you have a whole bunch of people, a whole bunch of different institutions that don't necessarily trust each other, but want to be able to work with each other in a secure way. And so creating this independent SWIFT organization to manage those transactions was the way they did it back then. But yeah, absolutely. Financial institutions have been experimenting with this. I don't know where they are in that process, but it would enable like much faster clearing. You know, right now, interbank transfers take quite a long time to go through, and there's sort of a lot of overhead. If they were to use blockchain, they wouldn't use Bitcoin or Ethereum or anything. They would create their own private chain just for these kind of transactions, Also for privacy reasons. They don't want to publish it to everyone, right? But then every single bank who's on the system would have access to the ledgers and be able to see things. So I suspect that we probably will see a move towards that kind of direction because it is extremely apt for that kind of use. And doesn't suffer from most of the weirdnesses that we've talked about because, you know, it is in this closed environment. It doesn't have the same kind of problematic aspects.
We'll be winding down the questions, but here's another.
Okay, I was most interested in the blockchain, far less in how it's applied to crypto coin. Since the blockchain seems to get its security from randomness, and you ain't ever going to beat randomness to give you things, why wouldn't we vote this way?
You certainly could create a voting system on the blockchain. I mean, I think I'd have to think about whether or not that's a better than just using, say, public key cryptography. One of the challenges is going to be anonymity. So how do you allow people to vote? I suppose you could have like a voting token. It would certainly make it super easy to sell your vote. I think might be one of the challenges that if it's anonymous in some way, the transferability would be kind of an interesting complication. I actually am friends with some cryptographers who've done a lot of work on digital voting systems, really thinking about some of these subtleties and complexities and failure modes and how to, for example, allow you to validate that your vote's been properly counted without allowing anyone to know how you voted and interesting things like this. So I'd love to see some more adoption of some more of these sophisticated systems like that and thinking about it. But, you know, we have arguments about whether or not we can trust digital tabulators or whether everything needs to be physical, you know, pieces of paper or something like that. So it may be a while before we get there, but it would enable some really interesting things, you know, things like sophisticated rank ordered voting scenarios and things like that might become possible with digital solutions.
I have a question, and I don't, closer to my mouth, they say, okay, I don't think I have to understand deeply the algorithms or the data mining, the blockchain. I kind of get it in a general way. My question has to do with, let's say 10 or 20 years from now, you think about how production of energy is going to be improved. So all the energy required for the data mining now could become extremely more efficient. We got AI. So this hard work of solving the algorithm could be done by AI extremely more efficiently. So looking 10 or 20 years down the road, seems to me that the mining of the coins could become extremely faster. Maybe there's built-in safeguards, but is there?
So there are some built-in algorithmic safeguards. There's also, I talked about the fact that the amount of Bitcoin that you get for each mining operation goes down with time. So the value of mining new coins comes out of that. So they made an effort to estimate what this curve was likely to look like. My guess is also, just because it's so computationally expensive and the system is designed to be that we may see over time people moving to other chains, because there are a bunch of other chains that work under different mechanisms and have different kinds of rules and different kinds of security mechanisms instead of just what they call the proof of work, where you're solving these puzzles. My guess is that on a 20-year time horizon, we're probably not using Bitcoin anymore, that at some point we'll see another one gain more currency, people move over to it. I wouldn't expect to see any kind of a snap crash happen, but that slowly, you know, this will become the new popular thing and the value of Bitcoin will then start to collapse and eventually no one would use it other than as a novelty, perhaps. In terms of the AI question, it turns out AI isn't useful for solving the particular kind of cryptographic problem that this is built on. So yeah, the AI because it is literally a guess and try kind of thing. You just need to be able to do all those guesses, and you're better off using a dedicated piece of hardware that only does those calculations than something general purpose like AI. And the serious Bitcoin miners actually have special hardware that is built at the chip level just to do that puzzle, so that it's massively more efficient. The bigger risk actually is quantum computers, which I didn't really even talk about. But the way public key cryptography is built on certain mathematical problems, right? The fact that it is extremely hard to factor numbers that are 1,000 digits long, really big numbers. You can't just go try things. But it turns out that quantum computers can sort of try all the possibilities at once. And that would allow them to potentially factor these giant numbers instantly. If you can factor the giant number, now you can derive the private key from the public key or vice versa, and the whole thing explodes. So there's a huge area right now in quantum proof cryptography, looking for algorithms that aren't vulnerable to the kinds of massive speedups that you get from quantum computing. But that's, in terms of where cryptographers are thinking and probably vulnerabilities to some of these systems, that's going to be it. It looks like the hashing algorithm, the puzzle that is in Bitcoin, isn't particularly vulnerable to quantum computing either, but the signature algorithms are. And so they're looking at that. We'll probably see actually a change either in the Bitcoin algorithm, which basically you just need to get all of the miners to agree that this is the new algorithm, and then it is, because it's all just consensual, to go to solutions that are much more resistant to that kind of attack.
And this will be our final question of the morning.
I've been trying to think of the last time or ever that electricity or power has used for such a dubious effort. And I'm wondering, and if I were, so there's that. It's only getting worse. I mean, there's more and more and more Bitcoins. There's more and more factories, generating all of this calculations. And I'm wondering if I were so there's that. But if I were a venture capitalist, I would go to a whole different, I would try to replace that. I would to go to a biological or a chemical or something other thing that does not ruin our environment.
So AI is the other big user, and that is now starting to dwarf blockchain in terms of power consumption. It's not a particularly easy thing for venture capital to make money on because it's so distributed, right? So there isn't a person who owns blockchain or owns Ethereum or owns any of these things. But the people who are interested in blockchain technology and are building out these new tools, they're very concerned about these issues of power consumption. The fact that it uses so much power is sort of an accident of the fact that that was the best idea they could come up with at the time for how to provide the security that they need. There are now a number of other blockchains that are out there that work on different principles, and proof of stake is the name that a lot of them use, that are vastly less power consuming. And so they're already moving in that direction, and I suspect that we may see one of those, and we talked about how Bitcoin might transition to something else. My guess is we're going to see a move towards that, especially though also they're going to be competing for that electricity, right? So if you've got X amount of power that you could buy, do you want to run that as a AI server farm, or do you want to run it as a Bitcoin miner farm? Because I mean, frankly, they all use most of the same chips. They're all using NVIDIA chips for the computation engine anyway. So they're somewhat interchangeable. And it becomes then an economic decision for the person, given that I have this huge supply of compute power that I could be putting at something, where do I want to put it? The fact that it does suck up all this power, use a lot of water, generate a lot of heat, raise electricity prices for everyone else. I mean, I think those are definitely societal and political issues. They're tricky though as well, because from the outside, it's very hard to tell what software is being run in that big data center over there and what it's doing, right? It might be doing protein folding calculations to cure cancer, and you wouldn't know. They all look exactly the same. So coming up with any sort of rule to say we like this use of electricity and we don't like that is fiendishly difficult to enforce. So it's an interesting problem.